welcome. Hope you and your loved ones are healthy, well secured, and are doing well. My name is John Diamond. I'm the president and the CEO of the University of Maine Alumni Association, and I'm glad that you are able to join us today. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that businesses are facing in light of the pandemic and the conditions that the pandemic has created, particularly the vulnerabilities that some businesses are exposed to, not just businesses, but consumers. Leading us through the discussion, it will be some representatives of Bangor Savings Bank, and we'll introduce them in a minute. They'll lead us through the presentation, and they'll be available to answer any questions that you'd like to offer. There are a couple of ways that you'll be able to pose questions. You can post your questions by using the chat button on the bottom of your screen. If you're not familiar with the chat button, it looks like one of those little cartoon speech bubbles that you see in comic strips. So if you want to submit a question, all you have to do is click on that bubble. It'll open up a field and you can type in your question and hit enter or return on your keyboard. And you can post your question at any time during the presentation or the Q&A, so you don't have to wait until we get to that point in the program. Or if you'd like, you can, during the Q&A, you can simply raise your hand or wave your hand and we'll call on you one at a time. And we'll do our best to get to as many of your questions as possible during the hour that we have available. Also, just so you know, we are recording this session and we'll be making it available online to anybody who'd like to watch it or rewatch it. So just to be aware of that. So right now I'm going to turn things over to Danielle Ahern. Danielle is a member of our Alumni Association's Board of Directors, but she's also a Senior Vice President with Bangor Savings Bank, and she helped to arrange for today's webinar. So Danielle, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, John, and thank you to the Alumni Association for hosting this webinar and the series of webinars that the association has put on to keep our University of Maine community connected, but also certainly our larger business community. So I'm always happy to be here representing Bangor Savings Bank, and particularly pleased that I'm here as a proud UMaine alum and a member of the Board of Directors, so thank you. I think we can all agree that our personal lives and our business lives have certainly changed in the world of COVID. And for many of us, the way we conduct business has significantly changed. Commerce is increasingly happening remotely, which helps us all stay connected, which is great. But it also, as you alluded to, presents certain risks. And fraudsters have been having a field day with the new environment that we're working in. So today I'm pleased to introduce members of our risk team from Bangor Savings Bank who are working in this space every day. They're incredibly knowledgeable experts in their field. And joining today from Bangor Savings Bank are Andy Grover, Executive Vice President and Chief Risk Officer, Russ Patton, Senior Vice President, Chief Information Security Officer, and Tim Cropley, Vice President, Disaster Recovery Coordinator, all from Bangor Savings Bank. So with that, I will turn it over to Russ to begin the presentation. Thank you.
Hi there, good morning, everybody. So today, as John and Danielle mentioned, we're here to discuss this unprecedented situation that we're dealing with, COVID-19 pandemic. Typically, we see a ton of fraud whenever there's a crisis in the country. We have seen things like fake Red Cross emails, phone calls that are fraudulent in nature, pleading to people to give money during massive hurricanes that we see in the South. This new situation that we're in now really has opened the field wide open. Criminals have unprecedented opportunities that they can use to take advantage of people's kind nature, the fact that people are a little distracted by this situation, pressure that they can put on people with the situation. So we're here today to talk about the landscape and what you can do to protect yourself in this ongoing crisis. So with that, we're going to talk about various methods that criminals use to just actually get at you. They're called threat vectors. So online, via the phone, identity theft. So we're going to go through that, and we'll start with online. As we all have email nowadays, we're all used to seeing emails come through. Our inboxes are overflowing every day. One of the easiest ways to entice you into a fraud scheme is what we call phishing. So phishing is an instance where fraudsters will impersonate a legitimate company and ask you to do something on your computer. We see things like this every day. Typically, there are fraud schemes involving, let's say, Amazon or UPS. Criminals will send out tens of thousands of emails to people saying, hey, your package is late, the thing that you're expecting from Amazon, click here to reschedule. And either get you to click on an attachment or click on a link and fill in some information. And it's basically a statistics game with these criminals. If they send out 200,000 emails saying that your package from Amazon has been delayed, they're bound to hit a few people that are actually expecting something from Amazon. And it's those people that will just react very quickly, and the situation seems to apply to them, and they'll fill in the form, they'll download some tracker software to their computer, they'll do something else and get themselves into trouble. It's all psychological. These criminals are preying on people. Their goal is to try and get you to react quickly without thinking about the situation, and they want to create some sort of sense of urgency typically to get that done. What they're looking to obtain from you are typically three different things. Either credentials, so that they can log on to various online accounts, your identity, which they can use to impersonate you, open up lines of credit. And we'll be talking a little bit about some more identity theft fraud stuff later. Or just plain money. At the end of the day, that's what they're looking for, is to make a fast buck and get out of town quickly and anonymously. So one of the most sort of easy way for them, the criminals, to make money is by putting malware on your computer. And one of the most prevalent forms of malware is something called ransomware. And ransomware travels typically by phishing schemes, like we were talking about earlier. So if there's an attachment that a criminal wants you to click on, sometimes it will download malware, ransomware, put it on your computer. And what this does is, it's pretty insidious. It will scrub through your entire computer and encrypt every single piece of data on your computer. So every document, every photograph that you've taken, even your music files and video files will be encrypted. You'll be unable to access them. And in order to access them, you have to pay a ransom. Now, this has been particularly successful as the ransom that they ask for is pretty much in line with the amount of data that they encrypt. They won't ask for a ton of money. They'll ask for, if you get this type of malware on your home computer, they may ask for $500 or $1,000, which for a lot of people that may be worthwhile to pay to get their data back. What makes this particularly scary is different forms of this will travel through a business network and will start encrypting everything on your servers, everything on other people's computers, and suddenly you've racked up a $30,000 bill with the ransomware criminals. Now, $30,000, if you don't have a backup of your system, might be a reasonable amount of money to pay to get that information back. And what we've been seeing during this time of crisis is, these criminals never rest. They are not the most polite people. They'll target hospitals and they'll target critical infrastructure. because they know that these people, time is of the essence. If their data is locked up, they need to get it back quickly and will ultimately be more likely to pay a ransom to get that data back. So that's one of the scarier things that can happen by clicking on the wrong email. We'll talk a little bit about how to look out and avoid these phishing scams. There's a couple of phishing scam examples that I've put on the slide for this one. The first one is intended to capture your identity for later use for identity theft. And what it is it's designed to entice you to sign up for supplemental income during the coronavirus outbreak. And you can see it says foodstampsassistance.org. It may look legitimate, but if you look at who it's coming from, it's actually coming from a UK email address. So any United States government program, I can guarantee you, is not going to be coming from the UK. The other thing to notice, and you can't see it because this is just a photograph, but if you were to take your mouse and hover above the link that it's asking you to click on, you'd probably see that it's going somewhere that doesn't look like a genuine US government domain. If you receive something like this in email, by all means, just go to Google, look up the program itself, and go through the proper government channels. If you're clicking on this, what they're going to ask you for is your social security number, some background information, your birth date, your address, your phone number, perhaps some banking information, and they'll collect that to use to impersonate you. Now, the other one is purported to come from the World Health Organization. And what that one is designed to do is if you click on it, it will ask you for your Office 360 credentials, your username and password to get into that under the guise of downloading some guidelines about protecting yourself from coronavirus. So a lot of businesses these days are using Office 360, intending to, keep documents accessible for the whole company and keep them in the cloud. This will get the fraudsters into that pile of information about your company. And from there, who knows what they get. So when you get any sort of unexpected email in your inbox, take a moment to just think, is this something you expect to receive? If it's completely unsolicited, if you're unfamiliar with the person that's sending it to you, delete it. If it's something you're really interested in, look it up online. That's probably the safest way to go. And a lot of things to look out for just straight up asks for money, any requests for personal information, or any requests for passwords. Those should really be some red flags for you to just stop and pause and think about what you're doing. And then look at the context in which it's delivered. A lot of times, this is all a psychological game for these people. They will try to create a sense of urgency to get you to click on something. One of the biggest scams that we see where there's a heightened sense of urgency is something called business email compromise. And what these criminals do is the end goal is to commit wire fraud, to get you as an employee of your company to transfer a substantial amount of money from your company to somewhere else. These emails will come to you, and we get a ton of them at the bank. And I know that a lot of other companies get these too. These emails will pretend to be maybe the president of your company, maybe the CFO, and they'll start off innocuous enough, typically with a, hey, can you do me a favor? Ask. But if you look at the email itself, you can see that it's not coming from your company, typically from a Gmail address or something like that. And that should give you pause to think, you know, why is Jim down the hall sending me something via Gmail, instead of one just getting up and walking over, or just using the regular company email to talk to me? Once you've engaged with this person who's asking you to do me a favor, they will head down the road of saying, you know, they're caught up in a meeting, they're out of town, they're otherwise occupied, and there's an emergency that's arisen, and they need you to transfer $20,000 to somewhere offshore, Philippines, China, somewhere like that, and they'll come up with an excuse. They'll leverage, since they're pretending to be a CFO or president, they will leverage that power and say, you know, you need to do this, and this needs to get done by the end of the day. Don't fall for it. Be wary of that sort of pressuring, especially if you know the CFO and CEO and they don't act like that typically. Look for emails that are originating offline, you know, again, from Gmail or from Yahoo or somewhere else. And then be wary of the way they're talking to you. A lot of these are written very strangely. You know, they'll start off, you know, hello, dearest friend. They won't even address you by name. And, you know, I know the president of the bank. He's probably not going to say hello, dearest friend, when he sends me an email. The easiest way to prevent these, just pick up the phone and call the person who's asking you to do this, and just say, hey, do you really want me to send $25,000 to the Philippines? Or walk down the hall. When you respond to these emails and engage with these people, they will just keep ramping up the fraud. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of, especially with COVID-19, is text-based phishing. So I know we all get a lot of spam and a lot of garbage texts, but we tend to get some nowadays that look legitimate and look related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So as you can see here, there are a couple. One is asking you to click on a link because the offices for your company are potentially closing. If you do click on that link, what the criminals are tending to gather is some information about you, well, your work email address, social security number, things like that. The one on the right, the red coronavirus outbreak warning, what they're going to ask you to do in that one is to click on the link to reserve your protection dosage. And to do that, again, these criminals want your social security number and a bunch of information about you. You're not going to get any protection dosage. You are just going to turn over your social security number and become a victim of identity theft. So again, much like the phishing emails, be wary of unexpected things that you receive via text. It's really, really super easy to mount one of these phone phishing campaigns. There's software that's costs a nominal amount of money that will just go through, you know, the entire area code of 207 and spit out these fake text emails and try and get as many people to click on this or turn over their information as possible. And, you know, since the government does use some of these emergency features on your iPhone to send out alerts, people tend to think that these are legitimate. Be careful, especially if something's starting to ask you personal questions or ask you to turn over information that you are uncomfortable with. And further issues with phone fraud include, you know, run-of-the-mill stuff. We've seen tech support calls. People get calls in the middle of the night that say, hey, this is Microsoft calling. We see some viruses on your computer and we need to clean them off. typically what these tech support folks will be asking for is your bank debit card number to help you clean them off. You know, they're providing a service. If anybody's ever dealt with Microsoft in the past, it's difficult to get somebody on the phone if you're calling them directly. They're probably not going to call you, and especially not in the middle of the night for a tech support issue. So be wary of any calls that you're getting coming inbound, especially from somebody that you don't know. And again, like everything else, this is, for the criminals, just a numbers game. 1 in 200 calls, they will get some money. And typically their average haul is about $3,000 on one phone call. So that's a good payday if they can make 200, if they have the persistence to make 200 phone calls and keep going. They're leveraging this, unfortunately, during the pandemic situation by calling folks and saying that they need to do contact tracing. They'll say, someone that you've been in contact with has come down with COVID-19 and tested positive. You know, they'll throw out a name, maybe it's a neighbor of yours, and start asking about your activities. And of course, like all these scams, they may ask for a fee for processing and ask you to turn over a credit card number. They may ask you additionally for your social security number because they're pretending to be the government and they need to confirm that it's you. Don't fall for that. We've also seen instances where people call on the phones trying to sell COVID-19 test kits. If you need to get tested for COVID-19, look it up on the internet. Do not buy a test kit from some random person that's calling you on the phone. And then face masks. When face masks were in short supply, the random sales calls, just going through the phone book basically and trying to sell face masks and 95 face masks for rock bottom prices. People would fall for it. They would turn over their debit card numbers and get cleaned out and not get any face masks. So much like everything that we've seen here, be very, very cautious when somebody is calling you. It's an unsolicited phone call and they're creating a sense of urgency. So the tech support scam that I was talking about earlier, what they do in that scam is, you know, they're purporting to be Microsoft, but they will say that, you know, you have malware on your computer that's infecting other computers over the internet. And if you don't talk to us and get this cleared up right now, we're going to be forced to turn this over to the FBI. So for a lot of people, that's a very scary situation to be in. So be wary of that. Be wary if somebody's asking you personally to transfer money to them unsolicited, especially if that transfer of money is something very strange like gift cards. We have heard instances where people will get phone calls that say, you know, your son is currently in jail and, you know, name some town, and to get them out, we're going to need you to buy $500 in iTunes cards and give us the code numbers from them. I don't know of any law enforcement agency that accepts iTunes gift cards as payment for bail, so please do not fall for that. And then the other thing that these folks ask for is passwords or PIN information, especially related to your online banking accounts. Now, I can tell you, working from a bank, we don't have access to your PIN or your password. We are never, ever going to ask you for that information. So the second you become uncomfortable with one of these calls, the best thing that you can do to extricate yourself from this situation, just hang up. And then if you are actually concerned that it is Bangor Savings Bank or somebody else calling you, look up the phone number online and call them directly. That'll save you a ton of money and a ton of headaches in cleaning this up after the fact. So one of the other vectors that these criminals use to get to you are just plain old USPS mail. They have no problem. It's easy to print out official looking documents, pop them in the mail. If you want to make something look even more official, send it by FedEx or UPS. It may be worth the extra money for these criminals to send something to you that way. So typically, what we see in terms of mail scams, we see a lot of fake credit card applications. You've been pre-approved for X, Y, and Z, and it's some bank that you've never heard of. You look them up online, they don't even exist, but people still fill out the forms, send it back, and turn over a ton of personal information about themselves. Their background, their mortgage information, their social security number. Bad news. Verify anything unsolicited that you receive in the mail online. Just take a few minutes to look it up. What we're seeing now in relation to COVID-19, we are seeing a ton of scams related to stimulus, asking people to pay a fee in order to receive their stimulus money. You do not have to pay a fee to get that money. And again, criminals are also using the mail to leverage contact tracing. Your friend or neighbor has been infected. We need to know where you've been, also turned over some money for a fee, and turn over your personal information as well. So, warning signs, just beware of anything unsolicited, any businesses that you have not done business with in the past, anything that's asking for something that's a little too prying, or especially, and you'll see in this next slide, which is one of the more unusual things that we've seen in this COVID-19 pandemic situation, actions that the person wants you to perform, especially things on having to do with your computer. And if you do receive something suspicious in the mail, contact USPS. They have online forms to fill out. You can let them know what you've received and they will do the investigation on your behalf. So right when the pandemic was starting to hit, we saw, and this is probably the most unusual thing that I've seen in quite some time, we saw businesses receive a package, and the package looked like it came from Best Buy. It contained a letter that is, thanking your business for being a great Best Buy customer, and the package came with a gift card for Best Buy, $50. It came with a USB device and a teddy bear. There's actually a little teddy bear in a box. It looked like a present and stuffed toy, and there you go. The malicious part of this is Best Buy is supposedly thanking you for being a great customer. They would like you to plug the USB device into your computer to pick out a gift for yourself. When you plug this device into your computer, what it would actually do is install a software keyboard. It would start typing, running scripts, and downloading malware to your computer. And this malware in particular would open a backdoor to your computer and give criminals access to it. If you were on a business network, it would give criminals access to your business's network. So be very, very wary of things that come in the mail, no matter what they look like or how strange they are. Think about it. And just as a side note, the Best Buy gift card that came with it was blank. Somebody just took a pile of them off the shelf. There's no money on it. You could not spend it at Best Buy. Just garbage. So we've been talking a little bit about ID theft. And what that is in particular is probably one of the more horrible crimes out there financially, is criminals will impersonate you for gain on their end. And this creates a huge mess for you to clean up. typically the one we see, the easiest ones for criminals to perpetrate are just open a bunch of credit cards in your name, and then withdraw all the money from the credit cards and leave you to clean up the mess afterwards. But there are more involved schemes that use your ID theft, especially during this pandemic. And one of the ones we are seeing now, especially at the bank, is unemployment fraud. And Andy's going to talk a little bit about this one.
Thanks, Russ.
Sure.
Yeah, you know, the old saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. Our fraudsters that are out there today certainly followed that motto. The unemployment fraud probably impacted several of you on the call. This was a nationwide attack. Maine was not the only place to be impacted by this. And it's the largest, you know, concentrated fraud on U.S. soil. This will be the multi-billions in fraud losses. But at the end of the day, the fraudsters are taking advantage of, A, we can't be in person to authenticate each other. B, just a mass of you know, requests coming in. And what happens here is when we're overwhelmed, and this is good information for businesses to understand, when you become overwhelmed, sometimes we shortcut. Sometimes we try to get the money out quicker. We try to do things a little differently. But in a crisis, it's really important to stick to what, you know, good controls and make sure they're there. But again, the criminals understood this. They understood that this was going to be an unusual situation for the unemployment offices of each state throughout our country. And they started filing fraudulent unemployment cases. How did they get this information? You know, how would you how did this person get your information to be able to pull this off? Well, this is truly just a bunch of previous frauds. The biggest one that I think contributed to this was the Equifax fraud. When the Equifax fraud occurred, there's a lot of information. If you think about what's on your credit report, that information was there. That was what was available for sale on the darknet. These criminals purchased that, so they knew where you worked. They knew, you know, relatively what your income is. They knew a lot of things about you, your social security number, your date of birth, and they can fill out a form easy enough to get the funds, the unemployment claim. What we saw on the bank side, we actually saw the funds coming in from other states, literally landing into our bank accounts, and they were working with somebody locally, and typically it was a romance scam. So they would build a relationship with somebody, and they would ask them, listen, can you help me out? I'm going to send my unemployment checks to you, withdraw the funds and send them back to me. Of course, you know, the best way would be, you know, a quick wire or a credit, you know, a little gift card or something like that. And these victims, if you will, they would take this money and they would do just that. So we were able to, proudly, our bank was one of the first ones to actually kind of identify this unusual behavior, reached out to Secret Service, and before we knew it, this was something that was just gripping the nation. This can be extremely scary if this is happening to you. It can also be extremely scary if it's not happening to you and you're watching it happen. You know, if you're receiving these things, if you're receiving an unemployment notice that something was filed on your behalf, or you should be receiving a credit, you need to understand, A, you're not responsible. This is really nothing that you've done wrong, but there's things that you should probably do. And we have this is actually an excerpt from our social media page, where we kind of talk about what it is that you should do. And the first thing is to contact one of the 3 credit bureaus. We have their numbers there. The key here is you want to let them, make them aware that something has happened to you. You want to make sure that there's nothing on your credit report, because again, there's enough data there to establish credit clearly, if they're able to pull this type of fraud off. So these steps are really about protecting you going forward. If you are in a situation in your life where you're no longer establishing credit all over the place, one of the things that I highly recommend is to put a freeze on your credit report. And again, you can call one of these numbers to do that. This protects you. Nobody can pull your credit without you unthawing it first. So that's why I say if you're not in a space in your life where you're constantly, establishing credit, this might be a good tool because there is time involved to unthaw that. But it's free. You can turn it on and off as much as you want. Unthawing takes about 3 days. I've heard it's actually a little bit faster nowadays. But it is a good tool to prohibit anybody from establishing credit. They would not be able to withdraw your credit. If they do, you'll certainly be alerted. There are other credit monitoring programs out there. I do recommend getting something. There are tools that you can pay for. If you want to be thrifty, one option is Credit Karma. They will certainly alert you if your credit's being pulled. It's one way of kind of being alerted that there's activity on your account if you're not going to take these other steps. But I highly recommend getting some sort of credit monitoring. Because this is related to unemployment fraud, and our employment offices are really trying to figure out where the fraud is and how, who's been affected by it. They're asking people to notify the Department of Labor when it happens. Again, you've done nothing wrong. There'll be no repercussions from this. This is really for them to help them do their investigation. The Federal Trade Commission, that is key in identity theft. It really just helps them do their investigation, and that's an important step. Working with local police department is important. It's important for them to understand that, but working with them is key. And then something that's really not on this list, but letting us know as well. Russ's team actually tracks all of our identity theft situations, and we make sure that we are hypersensitive to whatever else might be on your account at that time. So that's called a red flag identity theft alert, and it's something that we do. I think I'll go to the next slide there, Russ. So similarly, what's happening here is businesses are now being impacted by this. So as you know, the SBA came out with the PPP loan program. This was a paycheck protection program. This was to help businesses through COVID-19 where they weren't able to get any generating revenue because they couldn't be open. It was to help people still get paid. What we saw during this pandemic, again, not let a good crisis go to waste. They certainly went out of their way. Immediately, they were emailing applications, and as Russ was talking about earlier, these emails were gleaning critical information about your business so that they could do a takeover or so that they could figure out who was in charge and do some sort of a spear phishing attack on those individuals to see who they needed to get more information from. We actually received a completed application because one of our customers thought it was us sending the application to them, and it was a fake application. So we saw it firsthand. Again, we helped our customer, but be aware of those types of things. Who knows if there's going to be more waves of these types of programs coming out. Just always, as Russ said, if you want information about the SBA PPP program, it's always wise to talk to your bank directly or go to the SBA website. New things that we're starting to see is obviously fraud is alive and well. We did see, as noted in our slide here, some fake businesses. It's kind of a funny one. There was a whole bunch of farms applying for PPP loans. Law enforcement figured out that it was just a bunch of gentlemen in a Chicago apartment. No rolling fields in a Chicago apartment, I'm sure. So again, that's one of those situations where people took advantage of a situation. There is a lot of risk with taking these PPP loans. I mean, there are very specific things that you're supposed to be doing with that. That was one thing that we made sure that is communicated, but legitimate businesses lying on that application, we've seen that. There's definitely going to be some lawsuits from that. And that's really unfortunate because it's taking money out of people's pockets that really deserve that. One thing that we've seen recently that's not on the slide is we're actually starting to see some funds being sent to people's accounts, very similar to kind of like a lottery scam or a romance scam where I'm going to send you some money and I need you to send me a portion of it back. We're starting to see some of our customers being targeted with what looks to be a payment on an SBA PPP loan. It looks like it's coming from the SBA. There's a nuance to how they name themselves. There's definitely third-party loan companies such as Fundbox, FUND box, and that money is coming into their account saying this is for your PPP application, knowing that most businesses are expecting something to come in. They spend the money and lo and behold, or they send the fee back or whatever's requested back. And then lo and behold, none of the funds were real to begin with, and the customers left holding an overdrawn account as a result. So as these funds are coming in, it's always wise to double check, compare it to your application, talk to your bank, make sure that the funds are legitimate. We've set up algorithms in our system to identify these, but these guys are smart. They're constantly moving and changing those vectors. So it is one of those things that we're looking out for, but always be conscious of what's coming in and out of your account at all times. And with that, I'm going to, I believe, hand it off to back to Russ and talk about disaster recovery.
Sure. Thank you, Andy. Good to hear about that. And yeah, we've just been seeing, especially with the unemployment fraud, running rampant throughout our community. So we've talked a lot about the scary stuff that can happen out there, and we did want to end it by telling you how to protect yourself from these things that are going on. One of the foundational elements that you can do to protect your business is to have a disaster recovery program. That way, when disaster strikes, you are not figuring it out on the fly how to deal with whatever crisis you're facing. So for instance, the bank, we already had a pandemic plan in place for when this hit in March. We just decided, okay, today's the day, we're pulling the trigger on this, and we instituted our pandemic plan, and we sent folks to go work from home. We already had a VPN set up so that employees could complete all of their necessary business functions from home. We had a plan for our branches, and we just executed that plan. We didn't have to make up anything. Took a lot of the stress out of the situation, and disasters are a stressful situation to begin with. So anything you can do to help alleviate that stress and that tension during that time, you will appreciate it, I can guarantee you. Now, disaster recovery program starts with what's called a business impact analysis. As a bank, we have to have a pretty in-depth business impact analysis. This varies depending on the size of your business. What I would say basically is what you want to do is take a look at all the systems and processes you have in place, decide what is important and what is critical to keep your business up and running, and figure out what the backup plans are for those very, very critical processes and systems that you have in place. And then throughout the year, test your plan. If you have a critical system, take it offline and see how your company would function with that system offline. Can you get by? What are the things that you need to do to improve planning around not having that system? And then what we also do is we do tabletop scenarios. We come up with a potential disaster and get a good cross-section of our organization in place to just discuss our way through that scenario. It's an exercise that's worth performing. You will discover, I guarantee you, things that you had not thought of and ways to improve your business. And as far as cyber threats go, we've been talking a lot about that. You want to start by protecting your network with a firewall. A firewall will only allow specific traffic into your network, and so that it's not wide open. A lot of firewalls will actually monitor for malicious activity coming in and out of your network. Great idea. That's called an intrusion detection or an intrusion prevention system. It looks for that unusual traffic and will at least alert you to it or stop it right in its tracks. You do want to make sure that you have antivirus or anti-malware software on your computers and servers so that if somebody does accidentally download malicious software, this software will stop it in place. We are all working from home. Many of us at the bank, we're transitioning back to the workplace. But from March through June, the bulk of us were working from home. And you want to make sure that you have a virtual private network in place and something robust that, encrypts the traffic from home to work. Ideally, that should have multi-factor authentication. What that means is not just a username and password, but something else that you have in place to so that criminals can't take advantage of your virtual private networking and sign on to your network. Typically, we've seen things like key tokens that will have a rotating number on them, or other systems that will call back out to your phone and give you a code number to put in. That's a great idea for securing your virtual private network. Web filtering is also an important component to protect against cyber threats. A lot of these web filtering mechanisms will get updated daily, and they'll protect your employees and your network from sites that are hosting malware or malicious sites in other countries that are suspicious looking. It's also important to keep all of the PCs and servers on your network patched and up to date. Microsoft and other companies are continually finding flaws and bugs in their software that are called vulnerabilities. They will allow criminals to take advantage of certain aspects of your network and get in. So what you want to do is make sure that you are running all of your update settings so that you're patching as quickly as possible to take care of these security holes. Data backups are also an important component in protecting yourself. We had talked about ransomware early on. If you have a backup and you're faced with a ransomware threat, it's not so much of a threat if you have a complete backup and you can restore that quickly and orderly and get your network back up and running. It's also a good idea if you are backing up your environment to rotate those. If you have tapes nowadays, or if you're copying to a disk, make sure that disk is off-site so that if something does happen to your primary data center or fire or something like that, you have that data stored off-site and you can rebuild elsewhere. Another good thing to keep in mind is just old-fashioned security awareness training. Make sure that your employees are up to date, that they know that these scams are out there, they know how phishing scams work, and that's a good step toward protecting your network. Just getting people to recognize that these scams are out there and avoid falling for them. We also at the bank do a thing called penetration testing. You may have also heard this referred to as ethical hacking. We hire a company to try and break into our network. They will scan it. They will run malware against it. They will try their best to break down the front door and get in. It's a worthwhile exercise, and it will show you if you have any vulnerabilities on your network. And then finally, it's good to put together an incident response plan. Much like a disaster recovery plan, this is a little more on the smaller scale and is more focused on cyber threats. So, think about what you want to do as an organization if you discover a virus on your computer or a piece of malware. Think about what you want to do if you've discovered that somebody has breached your network and is on your network, and lay out those plans ahead of time so that you're not thinking about it on the fly. And then once you've done and set these plans in motion, please know this isn't something you can set and forget and walk away. Once you've got your network, your employees, everybody protected, it's a continuous process. So basically, you want to start with a foundational risk assessment look at your organization as a whole, figure out what the risks are to your organization, put controls in place to lower those risks. You want to monitor those controls once they've been put in place. And then if something should happen to your organization, you want a very robust incident response program or disaster recovery program, both ideally, in place so that you can react to it. And then just like a shampoo bottle, rinse and repeat. And this is something you're going to have to keep doing over and over again because these threats are continually changing. These criminals are getting more inventive by the day, and we're all susceptible to it. Thank you.
And Andy and Tim on standby, available for questions. We've got a few questions. Somebody asked, how long does the credit freeze work? Is it something that has to be renewed every so often?
No, the credit freeze is indefinite. A fraud alert, if you put a fraud alert on your credit report, which I don't recommend, is only good for 90 days. And you have to continuously do it. The unfortunate reality of this is this information is on the darknet. It is being recycled and resold constantly. This threat will never go away. So honestly, the best move is a credit freeze or credit monitoring.
Thanks. Somebody has asked you to comment on the use of voice recognition software as a security aid.
Sure, I could speak to that. We actually just recently rolled out some voice recognition software for the bank. So now when customers are calling in, because Andy mentioned all these breaches that are out there, the Anthem breach, the Equifax breach, there's a lot of personal information about everybody that's floating around out there. Criminals will use that to try and contact your bank, contact your credit card, and get further information about you, transfer money out of your account, whatever they can do, they will do. So putting voice recognition in place is like multi-factor authentication. It's an added layer beyond that information. So now we're capturing customers' voice. We're asking them the standard questions, your account number, your name, and verifying that with the voice backup as well. So, and voice prints are unique to every individual. They are very difficult, if not impossible, to spoof at the moment. So I think that's a good step forward in securing information.
For small businesses, how affordable is it for them to be able to maintain the most robust security practices? Obviously, it's going to depend, the need is going to depend on the nature of the business or the field, but can you address that a bit?
Well, some of these things scale down, and depending on your license, there are small business licenses out there for a lot of the security software. There are companies, if you can't afford to have a full-time IT staff, find somebody who is a good IT consultant that can work part-time for you and put together some of these controls. A lot of these cost no money. So for instance, VPN, if you've already got a VPN, there are people that will just use a username and password so that they can work from home. Companies don't know that it's just a matter of making a minor configuration change in their existing software to turn on multi-factor authentication so that you can have an added layer of protection and use your phone for an extra for receiving a code to get into the network beyond your username and password. And so a lot of the stuff isn't necessarily going to be expensive. If you're going to go out and buy the Cadillac of firewalls, that's certainly expensive. If you're going to buy an intrusion detection system, that's expensive. But the things you can do, Make sure that you're patching your environment and keeping that up to date. That's free and that goes a long way. Make sure that antivirus and anti-malware is installed on all of your computers. That's hugely helpful. Make sure that the folks that are working for your company have had training, that they know how to spot these scams and not fall for them. That's also free. So there's a lot of things that you can do that go a long way without spending a ton of money.
Sorry, I was muted. My apologies there.
I thought it was me.
No, if you have any questions that you'd like to pose, feel free to use the chat button or to turn on your video and wave your hand so we can see you and recognize you. Let me ask you, while we're waiting for other questions, a question about the ransomware. We can buy insurance for just about everything possible. Is there insurance that businesses could buy that would protect them from having, financially protect them from the loss that they might incur if they find themselves having to pay ransomware?
Yes, there is cyber insurance. That is a thing now. We have that at the bank. I've seen a lot of other businesses that find it worthwhile to pay for cyber insurance. And you would have to do the research and talk with your insurance provider to see exactly what they would cover for. But they do cover for a number of incidents. Breaches, for instance, they will take care of that in,
Yeah, I'll even add to that a little bit. I mean, if there's any customer damage that results, you want to make sure that insurance, different types of insurance are covering that type of thing if it was related to a cyber event. Sometimes your liability insurance may not, or your liability or umbrella may not be enough to cover that. And I think that's, Russ is getting to that is, this thing will help you get back on your feet, which includes, taking care of potentially harm that was created to your customers as a result.
Another question. You mentioned 4 steps that a business or an individual should take to address unemployment fraud. Are there those same 4 steps? Are they applicable to any other kind of online fraud?
Basically, with the exception of the Department of Labor. So, I mean, if you experience any type of fraud, it's always wise to reach out to your credit reporting agencies, find out what else is on your report. Again, seriously contemplate putting a freeze on. The FTC, they're tracking and taking care of identity theft, your local law enforcement. I do recommend, if you have an account with us or with another financial institution, going in and talking to them and saying that letting them know that you've been a victim of identity theft. That allows us to track that and monitor it on our side to make sure there's nothing else that could be happening to your accounts.
All right, great, thanks. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I want to thank the folks from Bangor Savings Bank for your willingness to be part of this and to customize this presentation for our attendees today. We really appreciate it. We will be doing our next webinar in 2 weeks, tentatively about UMaine football and what happens to UMaine football now that the fall season has been canceled. And then 2 weeks after that, we're doing a great session with Paul Majewski, who's a faculty member at the University of Maine, who was commissioned to do an expedition up Mount Everest. And it is the feature of the July edition of National Geographic magazine. And it's also the subject of a National Geographic television documentary. So that will be another interesting webinar that day. If everybody watching will be getting an invitation to respond to a survey about today's seminar, or webinar rather, and asking for ideas for future webinars. So be on the lookout for that in the next day or so. And also just a reminder that this will be available online if you want to go back to revisit it, and that will be available at the umainealumni.com website. So thanks to everybody from Bangor Savings Bank, and thanks to all of you. Please take care and stay healthy. Best wishes.